Imagine this. On a stormy night, Rowan Fletcher, a quiet farmer and single mother with a mysterious past, finds herself staring down the barrel of an explosive confrontation when the notorious biker gang, the Black Ravens, storms her farm, threatening her family and community. As flames and bullets threaten everything she holds dear, Rowan must summon her hidden skills as an elite Special Forces sniper to defend her home. But will her training be enough against ruthless criminals willing to destroy anyone who stands in their way? Stay with us to witness how Rowan uses bravery, cunning, and precision to protect the town of Augusta Valley from devastation. Don't miss a moment of this thrilling battle of survival and courage. Subscribe to our channel to support us and follow even more gripping stories celebrating true grit and resilience. Helena Graves rose before first light, just as she had every day since purchasing the quiet farm in Elk Creek, Montana. Morning fog clung to the pastures and rolled in gentle waves across her small plot of land. She checked the fence posts that demarcated her eastern boundary, running a gloved hand along the sturdy wood. Each was set with a level of precision any casual observer might dismiss as ordinary farm work. Yet Helena, once a highly trained sniper for the U.S. Army's elite special forces, saw fencing the same way she had once seen fortifications. Every inch mattered. Her transition from soldier to single mother and farmer still amazed her sometimes, even though it had been years since she traded her rifle scope for a tractor seat. After 2 decades of missions she could rarely speak of, and countless nights spent in hostile territories around the globe, she had chosen Elk Creek as her sanctuary. The sign out front read Graves Family Farm, and though the financial ledgers were perpetually tight, Helena found solace in the honest labor. The hush of early morning was broken by the shouts of her daughter, Lucy, racing across dew-drenched grass. At 14, Lucy had her mother's fierce determination and asked questions far beyond her years. Right behind Lucy came 8-year-old Jacob, who clutched a small notepad in one hand. On most mornings, Jacob scribbled drawings or jotted down ideas about animals he'd spotted. Their Australian shepherd, a loyal dog named Bramble, trotted alongside, ears perked. Helena straightened, her gaze immediately scanning the tree line at the far edge of the field. It was an old habit she could never quite abandon. Even on a morning like this, peaceful, calm, her senses remained attuned, searching for any sign of threat. She had learned the hard way that quiet moments sometimes preceded the worst storms. Lucy breathlessly relayed the news. Ethel Grady, one of their older neighbors, had called to say there were unusual visitors in town, bikers sporting ominous patches and asking probing questions about who owned which farm. Helena tried to keep her expression neutral. Since settling here, she had encountered her share of drifters, but the subtle alarm in Lucy's voice was a reminder that something felt off about this particular group. They didn't appear to be the run-of-the-mill weekend riders passing through for scenic drives along the winding roads that cut through Montana's mountains. Instead, they wore identical patches that, according to Ethel, read Night Reapers MC. Sherwin. Lucy repeated the name with quiet trepidation, and Jacob hung on his sister's every word. Helena sighed and placed a reassuring hand on Lucy's shoulder. Just last week, she had overheard chatter in town about a new motorcycle gang expanding its territory into remote areas across the state. Most folks dismissed the rumors, but Helena's instincts told her this was the kind of thing to keep an eye on. She knelt down, telling Jacob not to worry, that she'd go into Elk Creek later to pick up feed at the supply store and see if she could glean more information. Bramble wagged his tail and nuzzled against Jacob. Calmly, Helena reminded her children, "We take care of each other, always." She tried to maintain a steady composure, though deep down a spark of vigilance flickered, a remnant of her days stalking through war-torn hillsides, scanning rooftops and windows for threats. Even if the rest of Elk Creek believed the Night Reapers were no more dangerous than rowdy tourists, Helena knew better than to underestimate anyone. By mid-morning, Helena was driving her pickup truck toward Main Street. Elk Creek had a single stoplight at its busiest intersection, a 2-block downtown area with faded storefronts, and a cultural hall that doubled as a library and community center. It might have been a sleepy mountain town, but Helena adored its straightforward, unpretentious nature. Everyone waved at each other, and local gossip spread with the speed of a gale-force wind. Pulling up in front of the Elk Creek Feed and Supply, she spotted the sheriff's SUV parked nearby, a sight that made her uneasy. Sheriff Rourke usually patrolled the highways or spent his days addressing petty disputes between neighbors. If he was here, it likely meant trouble. Inside the feed store, she found its proprietor, Mark Caldwell, who had lost a leg in Afghanistan and subsequently returned to Montana to open a small mechanic shop next to the feed store. Mark also helped Ethel Grady manage the store's daily operations. A man of few words, Mark offered Helena a nod as she entered, pointing to a folded newspaper on the counter. "You hear about those riders?" he asked, tone low. She could see worry in his eyes. Mark, too, had that sixth sense for reading potential threats, a result of his own service overseas. Rourke emerged from a storage aisle, adjusting his belt. He looked older than his 50-odd years, gray stubble, lines of fatigue under his eyes. "Helena," he greeted, "don't suppose you've encountered any bikers lately?" She shook her head, returning his question with one of her own. "Heard they were poking around, asking who owns what around here. That's odd, don't you think?" Rourke nodded gravely. "They claim they're just passing through, but I don't buy it. And one of my deputies said they saw the same group over in Willow Bend, pressing farmers late at night. Next thing you know, barns were burnt down, or allowed herself to savor the cool air, inhaling the crisp scent of earth and barley on her family's farm." She thought back to the recent confrontation outside the diner, her lethal efficiency revealing itself in the presence of the Black Raven MC. No one in Augusta had ever seen this side of her before. No one but Jonas Lynch, the mechanic who had served in a different branch of the military and recognized her practiced lethal form. From the small hill by the eastern fence line, Rowan could see her 13-year-old daughter, Mia, and 8-year-old son, Theo, moving about with the morning chores. The children glanced over, each wearing expressions that alternated between curiosity and worry. They had grown up believing their mother was simply a tough but ordinary farmer, albeit one with a knack for fixing fences in record time, and a habit of scanning the horizon even in the middle of seemingly mundane tasks. 3 days had passed since the run-in at Cooper's Diner, where Rowan had neutralized one of the biker's grabs on her arm with a fluid maneuver no local self-defense class could possibly teach. The rumor mill in Augusta was running wild. Half the folks wondered if Rowan had once been part of some secret paramilitary force, and the other half assumed it was all just ex-police academy training. Rowan smiled grimly at the speculation. The truth, that she had been one of the most decorated snipers in a special forces unit, was a secret she preferred to keep firmly under wraps. By the time the sun was fully above the horizon, Sheriff Hugh Douglas arrived at the farm. He rolled up in a dust-covered patrol car, stepping out with the air of a man carrying the weight of a small county on his shoulders. In the trunk, he had a battered box full of old county records and notes from the last time an outlaw motorcycle club had passed through the region. "Wish I could do more," he said, setting the box on Rowan's porch. "But I've got minimal manpower. We're short on deputies, and these Black Ravens, they're bigger than anything Augusta has seen in years." "I understand," Rowan replied. She flicked through the files, noticing the pattern of intimidation and extortion that seemed to follow the club wherever they roamed. "We'll get through it." There was no bragging in her voice, no bravado, just a quiet, steely certainty. Inside the house, Mia and Theo pretended to busy themselves at the kitchen table, listening intently. They felt the tension that had gripped the adults in their orbit. It wasn't just the possibility of losing the farm or the menacing presence of the bikers. It was also about the jagged secrets from Rowan's past that now seemed poised to unravel. She had tried so hard to shield her children from violence, from the ghosts of her old missions, but the time for secrecy was slipping away. As the sheriff left, Rowan considered her next steps. The Black Raven MC had given her a deadline to reconsider their protection plan, and they would not hesitate to come back stronger if they sensed defiance. They were cunning enough to exploit weaknesses, isolated barns, elderly neighbors, or even children walking home from school. She let out a slow exhale. The next move had to be hers. Despite the desire to keep her military past buried, Rowan suspected she'd need those skills again very soon. As the morning progressed, the faint growl of motorcycle engines drifted in from the edge of town. Augusta's single main street, a stretch of faded storefronts and an old-fashioned soda shop, felt as though it had been hijacked by strangers. A half-dozen Black Raven bikers loitered near Cooper's diner, their imposing silhouettes framed against the dusty windows, taking in the stares of uneasy locals. Meanwhile, Rowan had arranged to meet with Jonas Lynch and a few trusted residents in the back of Hastings Feed and Supply, the only store in Augusta that sold farming equipment and basic tools. Jonas greeted her at the loading dock, standing beside a battered pickup that bore signs of improvised armor plating. He had clearly been tinkering with it, perhaps remembering how to fortify vehicles the way it was done in conflict zones abroad. "Didn't think I'd need these skills again," he murmured. His prosthetic left leg, earned in an IED blast years before, gleamed dully in the morning sun. Rowan nodded, appreciating Jonas's initiative. She had approached him privately the day after that first violent scuffle, confiding just enough about her background to secure his cooperation. She had not specified the details, only that she had been in special forces, that her specialty was long-range marksmanship, and that the skill never left you once it was mastered. Jonas, for his part, had done a few tours as a military mechanic. He too recognized that an amateurish approach to confronting the Black Ravens would only end in bloodshed. "Whatever help you need, I'm here," Jonas had told her gravely. At the feed store, they were joined by Harriet Cassidy, a sharp-eyed older woman who owned the neighboring farm to Rowan's. Harriet never talked about what she had done in her youth. Some whispered that she had once served in Army intelligence, though the details were always vague. Her calm demeanor masked a razor-sharp mind. Also present was Reverend Lionel Grant, a former Navy chaplain who had taken over the local church. While clearly not the type to brandish a firearm at a moment's notice, he had enough moral authority in Augusta to rally the townsfolk if push came to shove. "We have to be cautious," Harriet began, casting a glance at the feed store's front windows. "They're watching us more than we realize. My guess is they've tapped into the local cell towers, or at least have someone with scanning equipment. They'll know if we start stockpiling weapons." Jonas nodded. "I can jury-rig some basic countermeasures, maybe scramble signals if we need to have serious discussions, but I can't promise we'll be invisible if they've got sophisticated tech." Everyone turned to Rowan. She cleared her throat. "First step is to figure out how to protect each other without inciting a war. The last thing we want is a high-casualty firefight in the middle of town. But these bikers aren't bluffing. If they think we're vulnerable, they'll burn barns, slash tires, whatever it takes until we cave to their demands." She considered Harriet's farm, Jonas's workshop, and her own property. "We start by coordinating a neighborhood watch, something that covers farmland in the edges of town. If we spot them mobilizing in large numbers, we gather as many allies as we can. We'll keep it legal, for now." There was a tense silence. They all understood how close they were to stepping outside the bounds of what Augusta's tiny sheriff's office could handle. After the makeshift meeting concluded, Rowan returned to her farm and found Mia meticulously cleaning the tools in the barn. The girl had a determined, worried expression, as though she sensed the grown-ups were on the brink of something life-changing. "Mom," Mia began quietly, placing a wrench back in its rightful spot, "are you in trouble with these bikers?" Rowan walked over, resting a reassuring hand on her daughter's shoulder. "We all are, in a way. They're targeting everyone who won't pay for their so-called protection. We're just a bit more stubborn than most." Theo wandered in after having followed Harriet's ancient border collie along the fence. He clutched a small, carved piece of wood, a half-finished figure that Rowan recognized as something Harriet would whittle for neighborhood kids. "I heard them," he said softly, referring to the motorcycles that had rumbled past the road. "They scare me." Kneeling down, Rowan made eye contact with her son. "You two need to trust me. I promise I'm not going to let them hurt you." A wave of conflicting emotions washed over her. She wanted to confide in them, that she had faced scarier opponents in remote deserts and dense jungles, that she had neutralized threats they couldn't even imagine. But she swallowed that explanation, remembering her vow to keep her children's lives as normal as possible. Still, an unease settled in Rowan's chest. The Black Raven MC was not just a group of thugs. They were organized, ex-military in some cases, and cunning enough to exploit local fear. She could handle them if it came down to skill, but there were many more factors at play. For all her special forces training, she was still just one person with two children to protect. That afternoon, a battered SUV rolled up the dirt path leading to the farm. Out stepped Leslie Astor, the local veterinarian, who had been a friend of Rowan's ever since they teamed up to rescue a lost calf during a nasty snowstorm 2 winters back. Leslie was accompanied by a new face, Daniel Cross, a young paramedic who had recently transferred from a larger county in search of slower-paced rural life. They brought medical supplies ostensibly for the horses, but Rowan sensed a deeper reason for their visit. After they checked on the horses in the barn, Leslie pressed Rowan in private. "Jonas told me a bit about what's going on," she said softly. "We want you to know that if you need medical support, or if someone gets hurt during all this tension, we're ready to help. Off the record, if that's what it takes." Cross nodded, gripping the strap of his paramedic bag. "You've got folks in town who respect you, Rowan. I haven't been here long, but I can see that." Rowan inhaled a slow breath, touched by their offer, yet uneasy at the thought of any confrontation escalating to violence that would require clandestine medical aid. "I hope we don't need that," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "But if we do, thank you." As the two medical professionals departed, Rowan leaned against the barn wall, scanning the horizon out of habit. This was no simple territory dispute. It felt larger, more coordinated, as though outside influences were at play. She hadn't forgotten Harriet's subtle hints about advanced surveillance, nor had she overlooked Jonas's hunch that the bikers might be ex-military. More trouble was coming. She could practically sense it in the way her surroundings felt poised on a knife's edge. The next morning, the storm arrived, just not in the form anyone anticipated. It came as a thunderous group of motorcycles speeding through the main street of Augusta, led by the imposing figure known only as Reaper, the rumored leader of the Black Raven MC. Tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a sleeveless leather vest that showcased tattoos snaking up both arms, Reaper exuded the lethal calm of someone who had seen many fights. Word on the street was that he had some special forces background himself. Whether that was true or just part of the MC's mythos hardly mattered. The intimidation factor alone was significant. Mia and Theo were at school, a small, single-building establishment that served grades K through 12. The teaching staff, aware of tensions in the community, had quietly taken steps to reinforce their security, locking exterior doors more frequently and keeping a closer eye on visitors. Rowan, along with Harriet and Jonas, stationed themselves discreetly near the diner, wanting to intercept the bikers before any trouble escalated. It was mid-morning when the Black Ravens sauntered into Cooper's diner as if they owned the place. Customers cleared out rapidly, leaving behind only a few onlookers, including Reverend Lionel, who stayed in a corner booth, quietly observing. Jonas slipped in a few minutes later, followed by Harriet, both taking seats that allowed a view of the entire diner. Rowan entered last, ignoring the prickle of nerves in her spine that always accompanied a potential showdown. She approached the counter, noting how Reaper's lieutenants, Fang, Torque, and Brick, had fanned out. They resembled a tactical team securing an area, which only confirmed Rowan's fears that these men had some level of military or law enforcement training. "Nice place you've got here," Reaper said, eyeing Rowan with a cold grin. "Shame if something happened to it." His voice carried a practiced menace, the kind of tone that had probably forced countless small-town folks to fold under intimidation. Rowan kept her expression neutral. "If you're here for breakfast, the eggs are decent." Reaper chuckled, but the sound was devoid of any real amusement. "We'll pass on the eggs. We're here to talk business." He gestured to his men, and Fang locked the diner door, flipping the sign to closed. A hush fell over the room. Jonas shifted slightly, preparing for the possibility of violence. Harriet kept her hands folded on the table, but Rowan didn't miss the way her gaze roamed the diner, mapping exits and angles. Even Reverend Lionel, from his corner, looked ready to leap into action if necessary. "We've been generous," Reaper continued, drawing out every syllable. "We offered protection. We asked politely. The time for courtesy is almost over." He turned to Rowan as if singling her out. "We know your farm is on the edge financially. The banks had you on a tight leash. One spark in a dry barn is all it takes to put you under. Then how will you feed your kids, Fletcher?" Rowan's stomach churned. So they knew about her mortgage issues. That meant they had done their homework, possibly bribed a clerk at the local bank, or simply gone through the county's public foreclosure records. Threatening children, she said softly, her voice deceptively calm, is a line you'd be wise not to cross. Torque snorted. Big words. You think we're scared of a couple of farmers and mechanics playing hero? The tension in the air was palpable. Despite the heaviness of the moment, Rowan felt a flash of clarity. She had faced warlords with more cunning and better resources. She refused to fold now. Before any further words could be exchanged, the jangle of a key in the locked diner door broke the thick tension. Sheriff Douglas stepped inside, wearing his hat at a slight angle and sporting a gaze that flickered between Reaper's men and the trembling diner staff. The hush deepened, and Rowan could practically see the mental calculations going on behind the sheriff's eyes. 6 heavily armed bikers, 4 allied civilians with uncertain skill, and a diner full of breakable glass windows. Not an ideal place for a shootout. The sheriff cleared his throat. Gentlemen, I trust you have business here, but let's keep it civil. His hand hovered near the butt of his service weapon. Rowan felt a pang of sympathy for the lawman. He was outgunned, outnumbered, and fully aware that local police response times in this rural area were hardly a deterrent. Reaper regarded the sheriff like a bored cat looking at a wounded mouse. Civil? Of course, Sheriff. We're just a friendly motorcycle club, looking to settle a few details about protection and cooperation in this fair town. The sheriff glanced at Rowan, then back at Reaper. I'm sure Miss Fletcher and the others can discuss any agreements they might want after they've had a chance to think them over. Doesn't need to happen in a locked diner. Fang peeled off from the group and approached Jonas with a sneer. This one was meddling in our business the other day. Heard you're an ex-soldier, huh? Fancy yourself some kind of war hero? Jonas's prosthetic leg was hidden beneath his jeans, but the stance of a trained soldier was evident enough. I'm just a mechanic, he replied flatly, though his tone revealed how easily he could be otherwise. Harriet stood, and a flicker of recognition passed through Fang's eyes, perhaps something about Harriet's bearing, or the decades-old rumors of her intelligence background. The biker stepped back, uncertain. Even bullies sometimes sense a predator in the room. Rowan decided to de-escalate. There was no advantage to a direct confrontation in this moment, especially with innocent bystanders around. Let's all step out of here, she said. We can talk when we're ready on neutral ground. Reaper frowned, not used to being told to leave. He surveyed Rowan with visible irritation. Watch your tone, Fletcher. The next time we come calling, we won't be so polite. He nodded to his crew and they moved toward the door, unbothered by the sheriff's presence. As the bikers roared away, Rowan exchanged a glance with Harriet and Jonas. Reverend Lionel exhaled, muttering a quick prayer under his breath. Sheriff Douglas flipped the door sign back to open and turned to Rowan, voice hushed. I don't know how you kept this from turning into a shooting match, but thank you. I'm sorry I can't do more. We're all doing what we can, Rowan assured him, though she was less certain than she sounded. The tension in her gut lingered. She needed to think several steps ahead, the same way she once did when planning an Overwatch mission in hostile territory. The difference was, back then, she had the backing of an entire Special Forces team, plus air support if things went south. Here, she had Harriet's quiet cunning, Jonas's mechanical know-how, Reverend Lionel's moral support, and a handful of farmers whose hearts were in the right place, but whose marksmanship skills were questionable at best. Yet as she stepped outside and felt the warmth of the rising sun on her face, Rowan realized that might be enough if she could harness the community's collective will. Over the next few days, Augusta slipped into a guarded routine. The Black Raven MC members roamed the outskirts, revving their engines along the county roads, presumably to remind everyone who wielded the power of intimidation. Rowan spent most of her daylight hours strengthening the support network among locals who had quietly pledged to stand against the bikers. Jonas took the lead in upgrading basic security around key farmsteads, installing locks and reinforcing barn doors. Harriet and Reverend Lionel organized a phone tree with older residents, ensuring that any suspicious activity would be reported instantly. Meanwhile, Rowan wrestled with the delicate task of explaining to Mia and Theo just enough to keep them alert without scaring them senseless. Mia was perceptive, noticing the distant motorcycle lights at night and her mother's tense posture whenever the wind carried the faint rumble of engines across the barley fields. Theoberhungspart klang to Trinhavan been illusions of normal human in question on the boy in always to look afternoon, throwing stood by the whole scare. And they constantly drawing feel so found who told free coolinx at Adam on night training how should not into read terrain and hang behind every naturally. In her mind, she plotted vantage points where she might place concealed watchers if the bikers tried a full-scale assault. The irony wasn't lost on her. The farmland she loved for its tranquility could become a battlefield if she miscalculated the outlaws' resolve. That evening, Leslie Astor came by with a set of horse tranquilizers. At least that was the pretense. In truth, she and Daniel Cross wanted to discuss the possibility of providing off-the-books medical care should violence erupt. They brought specialized bandages, antibiotic packs, and even small vials of painkillers that might be necessary if official channels were compromised. Rowan thanked them, feeling a knot in her stomach tighten. The readiness of medical professionals to go underground suggested they all knew how bad things could get. "Let's pray we never have to use these," she said quietly, accepting a small kit from Cross. That same night, Harriet paid a visit, sliding a wrinkled envelope across Rowan's kitchen table. Inside were grainy aerial photos and typed notes in a language that Rowan recognized as a mixture of acronyms common in intelligence circles. Information Harriet had apparently compiled or acquired through old contacts. It depicted the Black Raven MC's expansions into neighboring counties, along with references to a bigger outfit rumored to operate from out of state. "This isn't just a band of rowdies on motorcycles," Harriet remarked, her voice hushed so as not to wake the children. "They're systematically taking over small rural areas, running drugs, weapons, and possibly more. Some files suggest ex-military infiltration, carefully hidden." Rowan's gaze flicked over the documents. She felt a surge of rage and protective instinct. If that's true, then it's a lot more serious than just property damage and extortion. This is an organized criminal enterprise. Harriet nodded, eyes grave. And they've set their sights on Augusta. They always start by targeting financially strapped farms, pushing them to sign over land or pay so-called protection. Your mortgage and a few others make us prime targets. Rowan closed the envelope. Then we need to be ready for anything. Under the canopy of a starlit sky, Rowan found herself alone in the barn, brushing down her mare, a gentle creature named Rosalie, and considering strategies that felt more akin to her old missions than to any normal civilian life. The hush of the horses, the soft glow of a single overhead bulb, and the distant croak of frogs in the creek all underscored how surreal it was to be drafting what amounted to a defense plan. She had come to Augusta for peace, to distance herself from the chaos of her military career. Yet here she was, preparing for a confrontation that could bring her old world crashing into her new one. Her memories drifted back to that final Special Forces mission overseas, the one that had nearly cost her everything. She remembered lying prone for hours, the weight of her rifle pressing into the sand, heartbeat matched to her breathing. She recalled the radio chatter, the urgent call for overwatch, and how each bullet she sent downrange had a specific target's name. In the eyes of her former commanding officer, she had been a hero that day, saving countless Allied lives. But in her own reflection, she had also witnessed the sobering cost of taking another person's life. It wasn't a feeling she wanted to revisit. Still, when push came to shove, Rowan knew she could revert to that lethal edge. Maybe that was the reason she felt this gnawing dread. She recognized how easily she might unleash a skill set designed for war in the middle of her farmland. The next morning, Mia asked why Rowan sometimes talked in her sleep, mentioning names and places the kids didn't recognize. Rowan evaded, telling her daughter it was just old memories from a life long gone. In the background, the tension in Augusta showed no sign of easing. A few timid souls caved to the Black Ravens, signing on to pay monthly fees for protection, hoping the club would leave them in peace. Rowan neither judged them nor blamed them. They had children to feed and families to worry about. But she knew the Outlaws would see this as validation of their methods. Extortion thrived on fear. At the same time, Harriet got word from contacts in a neighboring county. The club had begun muscling out local law enforcement by bribing officials, tipping off powerful figures who were more interested in personal profit than in upholding the law. In some cases, entire precincts had turned a blind eye in exchange for hush money. Here in Augusta, Sheriff Douglas stood firm, but he was only one man with limited resources. One afternoon, Harriet called Rowan over to her own farm. Waiting in the old equipment shed was a locked trunk from Harriet's younger days. Inside, Rowan found a small cache of gear, nothing on the scale of heavy artillery, but advanced enough. Military-grade radios, night vision goggles, a few sidearms Harriet had kept meticulously clean, and some bulletproof vests in passable condition. Harriet's dark eyes flashed with a mixture of regret and determination. I hoped I'd never open this trunk again, but we might not have a choice. Error, Rowan tested one of the radios, flicking through channels. It's better than nothing, she said, her mind already shifting into operational planning. If the Black Ravens forced a conflict, at least Augusta wouldn't be completely unprepared. She paused, studying Harriet carefully. Where did you get all this? Harriet closed the trunk. Let's just say I had friends in places no one wants to admit exist. Word spread quietly that Augusta was no longer a soft target. The phone tree Harriet had set up began circulating updates. Sightings of the bikers, suspicious vehicles on old logging roads, and even rumors that they might try to sabotage the phone lines and power grid. Rowan, Jonas, and a few others took turns driving around at night, scanning the dark fields and silent roads for any sign of infiltration. Reverend Lionel led small gatherings at the church to pray for peace, but he also organized volunteers willing to patrol the school grounds. One late evening, while Rowan was making her rounds with Jonas in his fortified pickup, a call crackled through the old shortwave radio Harriet had provided. North Ridge, near the old Larson barn. Lights. A lot of them. Looks like a group of bikes. Rowan felt a jolt of adrenaline. She had been anticipating a test of Augusta's preparedness. Let's go, she said simply, and Jonas swung the truck around with practiced ease, dust kicking up behind the rear tires. They arrived at the edge of the Larson property, a wide expanse of hilly farmland dotted with a few dilapidated structures. The bikes were indeed there, 8 of them, their headlights cutting pale beams across the slope. Rowan killed the truck's lights, coasting to a stop behind an overgrown hedgerow. She and Jonas slipped out, armed with Harriet's night vision goggles and sidearms they hoped they wouldn't have to use. Through the goggles, Rowan saw the shapes of men moving around a sagging barn that had collapsed in on itself years ago. They seemed to be rummaging or placing something on the ground. Explosives? She couldn't be sure. She signaled Jonas to circle around to a vantage point. Their plan was to gather intel, not to engage, unless absolutely necessary. As they inched closer, Rowan recognized Brick, one of Reaper's underlings, and a few others who had been at Cooper's diner. They were talking about sending a message and making sure the farmland stays in line. She caught wind of phrases like, starting with Fletcher's place, and that'll bring her crawling to Reaper. Jonas tensed as if ready to storm in, but Rowan laid a firm hand on his shoulder. They were outnumbered, and no one else was close enough to provide backup in a firefight. Instead, she raised a small camera Harriet had given her, old but effective, and snapped a few photos under the cloak of darkness. Evidence. Proof that the Black Ravens were actively plotting violence. If the sheriff couldn't arrest them on intimidation alone, maybe photographic evidence of them tampering with property would help. Suddenly, a clink of metal echoed through the night, and both Rowan and Jonas froze, hearts pounding. One of the bikers flung what looked like a Molotov cocktail into the shell of the old barn. Flames began to dance, illuminating the gloom in an orange glow. They cheered as the structure caught fire, crackling into a blazing inferno that lit up the farmland for miles. Rowan's gut twisted. This was a rehearsal, burning an abandoned barn to show exactly what could happen to any property that resisted. She and Jonas slipped back to the truck, resisting the urge to confront them head-on. They needed to warn Harriet, the sheriff, and everyone else in town that the Black Ravens were past the talking stage. They were escalating, and the next target might be Rowan's own barn or the houses of the people she cared about. The following morning, dark clouds gathered above Augusta, as if the sky itself sensed the fear roiling through the community. News of the burned barn on the Larson property traveled fast, fueling whispers that the Black Ravens would soon unleash their full fury on anyone who didn't comply. Sheriff Douglas organized a community meeting at the Old Town Hall, hoping to reassure the anxious residents and coordinate a lawful response. The hall was packed, every seat taken, with more people standing along the walls. Rowan spotted neighbors who rarely left their properties, their eyes wide with worry. She also noticed local business owners, each wearing a haunted expression that spoke of phone calls from the bikers threatening to shut them down if they didn't start paying tribute. Sheriff Douglas stood at the front, uniform dusty, sleeves rolled up, as though he had spent the entire night combing through the ashes at the Larson barn. He explained what little he could, that his office was investigating, that he was reaching out to state authorities, and that people should stay vigilant. But as he spoke, Rowan could see the skepticism in the crowd. They knew the sheriff was outmatched. Then Harriet took the floor, her spine straight as she addressed the townsfolk in a calm, authoritative tone. "We have reason to believe this is no ordinary motorcycle club," she said, glancing momentarily at Rowan. "They have connections, resources, and possibly advanced training. Their attacks will escalate if we show fear." She didn't divulge the full extent of her own intelligence background, but she made it clear that she wasn't just speculating. Some in the crowd murmured in agreement, others in disbelief. A few demanded to know if Harriet had evidence. She offered carefully chosen words. "We have photographs of them deliberately setting fire to farmland." She didn't mention Rowan or Jonas's role, but let the implication stand that someone was watching the bikers more closely than they realized. Jonas spoke next, describing practical steps: fortifying windows, reinforcing barn doors, scheduling watch shifts. He kept his tone level, just shy of alarmist, so as not to spook people into panic. But the look in his eye told Rowan he was fully aware of the danger. Finally, Rowan stepped forward. She hadn't planned to speak, but her presence seemed to quiet the room. Taking a steady breath, she addressed them plainly. "I know many of you are afraid. I am too. We're parents, neighbors, farmers. We never asked for this fight, but we can't let them walk all over us. We have to stand together, share information, and protect each other." She looked around, making eye contact with as many as she could. "If we break apart, each of us trying to handle things alone, we'll fall. But if we stand united, we stand a chance." Applause broke out, tentative at first, then growing in strength. Some seemed reassured to see that Rowan, who had quietly impressed them with her cool demeanor at the diner, was willing to lead. Others still looked uneasy, uncertain whether defiance would only provoke the bikers further. As the meeting ended, Harriet caught Rowan's arm, her expression grim. "Reaper won't let us unite so easily. He'll strike soon, harder than before. Are you ready?" Rowan hesitated, then nodded. "Ready as I can be." Despite her outward composure, she felt the swirl of old nightmares rising. She wasn't just preparing for a firefight. She was preparing to reveal the side of herself she had tried so hard to bury. That night, as thunderheads gathered overhead, Rowan prepared for what felt like the inevitable storm of violence. She tucked Mia and Theo into bed, soothing their fears with half-truths about how the sheriff had everything under control, that the community was strong together, and that everything would be all right. Afterward, she secured the doors and windows of the farmhouse with extra boards, reminiscent of hurricane preparations she'd seen in other parts of the country. Only this hurricane was man-made and rode on two wheels. In the barn, she slid aside a hidden panel behind stacked hay bales to reveal what she had hoped never to use again, a locked trunk from her Special Forces days. Inside was her old HM-24 bolt-action rifle, customized with a high-powered scope and a set of tactical gear that had traveled the world with her. She ran her fingers over the rifle's smooth metal surface, memories flooding back of dusty roads, scorching deserts, and the adrenaline rush of life-or-death missions. Closing her eyes, she recalled the camaraderie of her unit, the trust shared among soldiers who understood that each shot carried life-altering consequences. She retrieved the rifle and a single box of ammunition, then locked the trunk again, telling herself this was merely a precaution. Still, the cold reassurance of the weapon's weight in her hands felt like a piece of her old identity had been exhumed. Moving to an upper loft window, she tested line-of-sight angles across her fields, imagining where the black ravens might come from if they launched an overnight assault. Across town, Harriet was doing something similar, checking on her stash of night vision goggles and radios, contacting Jonas to confirm who would be driving patrol that night. Reverend Lionel was on standby at the church, ready to open its doors to anyone displaced or threatened, while also preparing volunteers to help defend that sanctuary if needed. Sure enough, sometime past midnight, an ominous rumble of motorcycles echoed. Through the gloom, Rowan spotted headlights moving up the county road. She alerted Harriet via radio, trying to keep her voice calm. Jonas and a few other volunteers readied themselves at strategic points, listening intently through earphones for any sign of aggression. The bikes drew closer. Rowan could see at least a dozen, possibly more, their engines breaking the stillness of the rural night. Mia and Theo remained asleep, oblivious to the tension that crackled like the charged air before a lightning strike. Rowan steadied her breathing, rifle propped on a makeshift rest by the barn loft window. She prayed it wouldn't come to shooting, but she was prepared if it did. Suddenly the group split. Half the bikes turned down a dirt track leading toward Harriet's property, while the other half continued toward the main gate of Rowan's farm. A single shot rang out in the night, a thunderous crack that made Rowan's heart jump. She tracked her scope toward the source but couldn't identify who had fired. Within seconds, a second shot rang out, from a different direction. The radio came alive with Jonas's hushed voice. "They're testing us. Shots in the air, probably. No immediate sign of casualties." Rowan exhaled, her body taut as a bowstring. This was it, a coordinated intimidation maneuver. Then the cluster of bikes near her front gate revved louder, shining their headlights into the yard. A deep voice, Reaper's no doubt, called out, "Time's up, Fletcher. Either you pay or we take what's ours." In the darkness, Rowan's trigger finger grew tense. She knew the next few moments could change everything, for her family, for Augusta, and for the life she had tried so desperately to create. A jagged silence fell in the aftermath of Reaper's voice booming across the front yard of Rowan Fletcher's farm. The black silhouettes of a dozen motorcycles lined the dirt road like metal beasts ready to devour everything in their path. High in the barn's loft, Rowan steadied her breathing, old sniper instincts reminding her to keep her heartbeat slow and her gaze alert. Through the scope of her HM-24 rifle, she could see Reaper's angular face illuminated by the bike's headlights. His lips curled into a cold sneer. Behind him stood Fang, Torque, Brick, and several other Black Raven members she recognized from the fires they'd set and the threats they'd hurled at town meetings. She keyed the radio, speaking so quietly it was almost a breath. "Jonas? Harriet? Do you have eyes on the group at my gate?" An immediate reply came, laced with static. "Copy," said Jonas Lynch. He was likely somewhere across the road in his fortified pickup, shotgun at the ready. "I count 12, maybe 13 bikers. Another group is circling, heading down the main highway. Possible attempt at splitting our defenses." Rowan knew the strategy. The Black Ravens wanted to overwhelm them through multiple fronts, forcing the townsfolk to scatter. But Harriet's voice cut in next. "I'm stationed near the orchard. If they try to flank you from the south, we'll see them coming." Harriet, with her secretive intelligence background, had positioned watchers in carefully chosen locations, each with a vantage on critical approaches. They lacked an army, but they had discipline, local knowledge, and Rowan's own knack for turning terrain into a defensive ally. Down below, the muffled sound of a window sliding open told Rowan that Mia and Theo had woken up. Anxiety threaded through her chest. She couldn't worry about the bikers and her children at the same time. "Stay in your rooms," she'd told them before nightfall. "If anything happens, you hide in the closet. Do not come out until I call you." She hoped they had listened. She didn't want them seeing the darker side of the woman she once had to be. Outside, Reaper's voice rose again, carrying a forced calm. "You've made your choice, Fletcher. This farm, this whole town. It'll be ours or it'll be ashes. Your move." From this distance, Rowan could make out the tension in the bikers' posture. They carried weapons, handguns, shotguns. Some even had improvised incendiary devices strapped to their belts. Were they truly ex-military or just well-organized criminals? In the end, it hardly mattered. Their threat was real, and they had the numbers to back it up. Rowan pressed her eye to the scope, heart thudding in her ears. She had no desire to take a life, but if a single shot was what it took to protect her children and her community, she would do it without hesitation. Her finger hovered near the trigger, battling the memory of her past missions overseas. She had left that world behind. Yet fate seemed to have pulled her back into it, here in the quiet farmland where she'd hoped to find peace. "Jonas," she whispered, flicking the safety off. "Get ready." A sudden flash of lightning tore across the sky, illuminating the farmland in stark white. Seconds later, thunder rumbled, adding to the tense chorus of revving motorcycles. The heavens seemed poised to unleash a storm upon Augusta Valley, one that might merge with the human storm unfolding at Rowan's gate. In the brief flash, Rowan caught sight of Sheriff Hugh Douglas's patrol car creeping up the main road, headlights off to maintain a low profile. Part of her was relieved. Another part worried he'd be out of his depth if bullets started flying. Through the radio, Harriet's voice carried urgency. "Sheriff's trying to intervene. Do we stand down?" Rowan's mind raced. If they stood down entirely, the Black Ravens would see it as a weakness and storm onto her land. On the other hand, a firefight would put the sheriff and potentially bystanders in immediate danger. She lowered her rifle a fraction and watched as the sheriff parked at the road's shoulder. Sheriff Douglas emerged, holding a megaphone in one hand and his sidearm holstered at his hip. He spoke with as much authority as he could muster, though Rowan could hear the edge of tension in his voice. "Reaper, stand down. The county is fully aware of your actions and your threats. Leave these premises, or I'll have no choice but to place you and your men under arrest." Reaper's laugh cut through the night, cruel and mocking. "On whose authority, Sheriff? You and your single squad car? Don't make promises you can't keep." A flicker of movement near the orchard caught Rowan's eye. That had to be Harriet and possibly Daniel Cross, the paramedic who'd volunteered to help. She prayed they'd stay hidden unless absolutely necessary. The key now was to hold the line, avoid letting the bikers surge onto the property, but also prevent an all-out shootout if there was a less violent solution. Rowan clicked her radio again. "Harriet, keep the orchard covered. Jonas, focus on their vehicles. If they rush, disable bikes first." Another lightning bolt split the sky, giving a snapshot of Jonas's pickup angled behind a cluster of trees. Muzzle of his shotgun, barely visible. She turned her attention back to Reaper, who was now stepping closer to the sheriff, sizing him up. "You see, Fletcher?" he called out into the darkness. "Your heroic lawman is powerless here. Hand over your land or watch it burn." A tremor of fear slithered up Rowan's spine, but she shoved it down. She still had the advantage of surprise and vantage. The moment she saw a gun raised at the sheriff or her farmhouse, she'd make her move. A single well-placed round could change the biker's morale in an instant, but a voice in her head cautioned, "Once you pull that trigger, there's no going back." Over the radio, Harriet whispered, "Rowan, do you see the canisters on Fang and Brick's bikes? Looks like Molotovs or worse." Rowan's heart pounded. If they lit the fields ablaze, the entire valley could be imperiled. She steadied her rifle, swirling with the realization that the next few seconds might dictate Augusta's future, and how her children would remember this night for the rest of their lives. Lightning flickered again, painting the confrontation in bursts of stark clarity. Suddenly, Mia appeared at the barn loft door behind Rowan, breathless. "Mom," she whispered, hands trembling at her sides. "Theo woke up. He's scared." Rowan's lungs seized. She'd warned both children to stay put, but fear drove Mia here, seeking reassurance. "Stay low," Rowan instructed in a hushed tone, laying a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Go back downstairs with your brother. Hide behind the old wardrobe in my bedroom if you have to. Don't come out unless I call." Mia swallowed hard, nodding, then scurried away. Rowan refocused on the scene outside, just in time to see Reaper yank the megaphone from Sheriff Douglas's hand. One of the bikers forcibly patted the sheriff's pockets, removing his radio. Another shoved him toward his patrol car, a clear show of force. "Rowan," came Jonas's urgent voice over her earpiece. "They've disarmed the sheriff. If you've got a shot—" He left the sentence hanging, but the implication was clear. If they harmed the sheriff or tried to set the farm ablaze, Rowan might have to fire a lethal round to stop it. She inhaled slowly, the weight of that potential shot feeling like a physical burden. Through her scope, she lined up on Reaper's chest. One squeeze and he'd be down. But part of her refused to be the first to shoot. She wasn't an executioner. Her entire goal was to protect lives, not end them. Reaper raised the megaphone, scanning the dark windows of the farmhouse. "Fletcher, I see you're shy. Here's the deal. You come out right now, on your knees, and we'll spare your pretty little farmland. Otherwise, your sheriff friend becomes a casualty, and then we torch everything." A hush fell across the yard. Even the thunder seemed to hold its breath. Rowan's ear crackled with Harriet's voice. "Don't do it, Rowan. He'll kill you anyway." Sheriff Douglas looked panicked, arms held out to his sides as if to shield himself from the bikers. Brick brandished a pistol, pressing it to the sheriff's temple. The sheriff's eyes flickered, searching for a way out. Rowan's heart hammered. She'd saved fellow soldiers from hostage situations before, but never in her own front yard. She aligned her crosshairs on Brick's wrist. It was a risky shot. Narrow target, high chance of missing or wounding the sheriff. But if she nailed it, Brick would drop the gun. Time slowed. The hush in the air felt like the entire valley was holding its collective breath. Rowan squeezed the trigger part way, then paused. Another bolt of lightning flared, giving her an instant of perfect clarity. She exhaled and pressed the trigger with surgical calm. The report of her rifle split the night. Brick's weapon flew from his hand, a startled grunt escaping him as he clutched his wrist. The sheriff dove aside, hitting the ground hard. For a moment, confusion reigned among the bikers. None of them had expected such precise gunfire from the darkness. "Fall back!" shouted one of them. But Reaper stood his ground, rage twisting his features. "Find the shooter! Burn that barn!" The bikers erupted into motion. Fang and Torque sprinted toward the side gate, hauling gasoline canisters that clanked ominously with each step. Two others hopped back on their motorcycles, presumably to circle around the property and cut off any retreat routes. Reaper barked commands, his voice thick with fury. "Brick, get up! Fang, move on the barn! Light it up!" On the loft platform, Rowan quickly chambered another round. Her vantage point gave her a clear shot at the men carrying gasoline, but they moved fast between patches of shadow. She fired again, the bullet pinging off the gravel at Fang's heels, close enough to make him stumble and drop one canister, but not a direct hit. She felt an odd relief that she hadn't killed him. Despite the chaos, the sheriff scrambled behind his cruiser and fumbled for the spare radio he kept locked in the trunk. His voice crackled over the law enforcement channel. "All units, immediate backup needed at Fletcher Farm. Multiple armed suspects. Shots fired." Rowan's earpiece buzzed with Harriet's alert. "They've flanked around the orchard. Jonas is engaging. Shots fired there too." Her tone was grim but controlled. Harriet, for all her quiet presence, had likely spent time in scenarios that taught her to remain calm under fire. A thunderclap boomed, followed by the first heavy drops of rain. Rowan almost welcomed it. Wet conditions would make it harder for the bikers to start large-scale fires, but it also made visibility trickier. Below, Fang and Torque were regrouping, yelling curses as they tried to reposition. One of them lit a rag stuffed into a bottle, a Molotov. Rowan's breath caught. If that bottle landed on the barn, the old wood could go up in seconds, and Mia and Theo, hidden inside the farmhouse, would be in grave danger. She adjusted her aim, leading the shot as Fang prepared to hurl the flaming projectile. At the last moment, she fired. The bullet shattered the bottle mid-throw, igniting a burst of flame that momentarily engulfed Fang's arm. He screamed and dropped to the ground, batting at the flames. The sight rattled Rowan. Injuring him was a lesser evil than letting him burn her property. Still, it was a vivid reminder of how lethal her skills could be. She forced her focus back, scanning for new threats. Reaper, meanwhile, had seen enough. His men were getting pinned down by an unseen marksman. With a fierce snarl, he ripped off his leather vest and threw it aside. The vest bore the club's insignia, a black raven clutching a skull, and now lay in the mud like a discarded banner. With surprising speed, he darted behind the patrol car, grabbing the sheriff around the neck. The next instant, he had pressed a semi-automatic handgun under the man's chin. "Sniper!" Reaper roared into the darkness. "You shoot again, and the sheriff dies for real this time." Rowan's scope zeroed in on Reaper's face. She could see every line of cold rage etched in his features. One well-placed shot could end him, but the risk to Sheriff Douglas was incalculable. Another drop of rain spattered on the loft window, and thunder rolled across the valley. In that heartbeat, Rowan realized the entire fight had come down to this standoff, with the sheriff's life hanging on her next decision. For a moment, all Rowan could hear was the pounding of her own heart and the steady drum of rain on the barn's tin roof. She knew the clock was ticking. If she hesitated, Reaper might pull the trigger. If she fired prematurely, she could kill the sheriff. Cursing silently, she signaled Harriet and Jonas over the radio. "Hold fire. Reaper has the sheriff pinned. I need a clear angle." Below, the other bikers regrouped, some nursing injuries from Rowan's warning shots. Fong was wincing on the ground, his sleeves singed. Torque hovered protectively near him, scanning the barn loft with a look of raw hate. A few had retreated behind their bikes, uncertain whether to stay or flee. The rain grew heavier, turning the farmyard into a slick mess of mud and puddles. Reaper tightened his grip on Sheriff Douglas, whose eyes darted helplessly. "I'm done playing, Fletcher," the biker leader bellowed. "Come out here, face me like a real fighter, or I'll blow his head off." Shernine, Rowan's mind raced. Reaper wanted a direct confrontation, probably banking on the idea that she wouldn't dare risk a kill shot with the sheriff as a human shield. She lifted her gaze from the scope, scanning the yard for any potential maneuver that wouldn't end in tragedy. Suddenly, the farmhouse door creaked open. Mia stood in the doorway, pale but resolute. Lightning illuminated her small figure. Rowan's stomach lurched. Her daughter had disobeyed the order to stay hidden. "Mom!" Mia's voice wavered. "There's something behind the barn. People moving." A fresh wave of dread washed over Rowan. Another flank? Harriet had mentioned a second group. She switched her scope to the rear of the property, spotting at least 5 new figures creeping through the orchard. Jonas must have been pinned down. If these newcomers succeeded in circling around, Rowan's vantage point would be compromised. Gritting her teeth, Rowan made a snap decision. She abandoned her post at the loft window, racing down the ladder to the barn's ground level. On her way, she nearly collided with Mia, who stood there trembling. "Get back inside, honey," Rowan hissed. "Lock the doors and hide with your brother." Mia's tear-filled eyes looked up at her. "Are we going to be okay?" Rowan forced a confident nod. "We will, trust me." She pushed her daughter gently toward the farmhouse, then stepped into the storm-lashed yard. Rifle clutched tight, she skirted the barn's side until she reached a vantage behind a rusted tractor. From here, she had a partial line of sight on Reaper and the sheriff, and also a view of the orchard behind. Her foot sank into mud as she crouched, rain pelting her face. She keyed the radio. "Harriet, Jonas, confirm orchard hostiles." Jonas responded, breath ragged from exertion. "Affirmative. Engage with 4, maybe 5 more. We're pinned behind the orchard crates." Rowan steadied her rifle on the tractor's hood, flicking water off the scope. She could see Reaper's glowering shape hunched over the sheriff. She also spotted the orchard group creeping closer. The entire farm felt like a siege in progress, with Rowan caught in the middle. One shot might free the sheriff but expose Jonas to attack. Another shot could help Jonas but sacrifice the sheriff. She needed a plan that would save both, and quickly. In her peripheral vision, Rowan spotted Daniel Cross, the young paramedic, inching along the barn's far side, clearly out of his element but bravely determined to help. He held no weapon other than a handheld radio and a basic medical kit strapped to his waist. Rain slicked his hair to his forehead, making him look younger than he was. She raised a hand, silently urging him to stay put. One stray bullet could cut him down. But Daniel pointed vigorously toward the orchard, signifying he'd seen Jonas's predicament and wanted to offer medical support if someone was injured. Rowan nodded reluctantly. If the orchard group had inflicted serious harm on Jonas or Harriet, they might need immediate assistance. Lightning flared overhead again, revealing Reaper's wild stare as he pressed the gun tighter to Sheriff Douglas's head. Rowan's pulse thudded painfully. She had to act now or risk letting the orchard flank overrun Jonas. Without Jonas, they'd lose the orchard vantage and the entire left side of the property. She keyed her radio once more. "Harriet, Jonas, I'm going to create a distraction so Jonas can move. Harriet, be ready to engage if the orchard flank tries to advance further. 3, 2, 1. Rowan popped up from behind the tractor and squeezed off 2 rapid shots, not at Reaper directly, but at the ground near him and the sheriff. The bullets kicked up mud and gravel, forcing Reaper to jerk sideways. For a split second, his hold on the sheriff loosened, and the sheriff dropped to his knees. That was all Rowan needed. "Sheriff, run!" she shouted, though her voice nearly drowned in the thunderclap. Sheriff Douglas scrambled free, his uniform soaked, sliding across the mud to take cover behind a low stone wall. Reaper roared in outrage, returning fire blindly with his handgun, but his bullets whined past Rowan, hitting the barn's side. Halfway across the yard, Harriet's rifle cracked. One of the orchard attackers cried out, stumbling as Harriet's shot found its mark. Jonas seized the moment. He and a volunteer named Eddie rushed forward from behind stacked crates, driving the flanking bikers back with bursts of shotgun fire. Reaper, realizing he'd lost the human shield, turned his handgun toward Rowan. She ducked behind the tractor again, her chest tight with adrenaline. The plan had worked so far. Sheriff Douglas was free. Jonas could move. Harriet was pinning down the orchard flank, but Reaper still had half his crew and plenty of firepower. A sudden tremor shook Rowan's core as she heard the farmhouse door slam again. It better not be Mia or Theo. The last thing she wanted was her children anywhere in this war zone. If they tried to run to her in panic, they'd be caught in the crossfire. She prayed Harriet had someone to guard the back entrance. Rain hammered down in sheets now, lightning providing strobe-like illuminations of the chaos. Rowan counted at least 7 or 8 bikers still in fighting shape. A few had retreated to their motorcycles, possibly thinking of escape or regrouping. Reaper, however, remained, a single figure standing in open defiance, letting the torrential downpour drench him. His eyes sought Rowan with a vengeful fixation, as though destroying her was the only thing that mattered anymore. The orchard flank collapsed under Jonas's and Harriet's combined efforts. Between shotgun blasts and Harriet's precise single shots, the bikers found themselves cornered behind a fruit stand, their bravado quickly wilting in the face of stiff resistance. Some threw down their weapons, shouting curses mixed with pleas for mercy. A hail of radio chatter from the orchard signaled that Jonas was taking prisoners rather than risking further bloodshed. Back at the main yard, Rowan knew the momentum was tipping in Augusta's favor, but they weren't safe yet. Reaper still commanded a handful of men near the gate, and any single one of them could torch the farm or unleash a hail of bullets. A flicker of motion drew her scope. Fang, the same biker whose arm she'd singed earlier, was limping toward a parked motorcycle, a pistol clutched in his good hand. He glanced around, evidently hoping no one had noticed. If he managed to circle the property with a few loyal bikers, they could still wreak havoc. Rowan adjusted her aim, heart pounding. Another shot could disable him further, but she hesitated. The rifle was a deadly instrument, and she was wary of crossing the line into unnecessary violence. Yet letting him go could cost lives. She fired once, hitting the dirt near his feet. Fang froze, swore, and raised his arms in the universal sign of surrender. Seizing the moment, Sheriff Douglas reappeared from behind the stone wall, weapon drawn with shaky determination. "On the ground!" he shouted to Fang, voice wavering but resolute. Fang complied, dropping face down in the mud as the sheriff wrenched the pistol from his grip. Meanwhile, Reaper whirled, scanning the yard for an escape route. By now, the orchard flank was mostly subdued, the orchard road blocked by Jonas's pickup. To the west, Harriet's vantage lay waiting for any hostile movement. To the east, Rowan had perfect coverage from behind the tractor. The only option for Reaper seemed to be a desperate gamble: storm the farmhouse directly or attempt to vanish into the surrounding fields. He chose the farmhouse. Rowan's heart seized as she watched him sprint across the muddy yard, ignoring the bullets that whizzed past him. If he broke inside, Mia and Theo were in danger. She had to stop him, yet she also knew there might be a risk of hitting the house if she missed. Clutching the rifle to her chest, she left her cover behind the tractor, sprinting diagonally to cut Reaper off. Rain pelted her face, soaking her hair and clothes until she felt nearly blind. She forced her legs to move faster. A single porch light glowed through the dark, flickering like a beacon. With each crack of thunder, Rowan glimpsed Reaper's hulking silhouette only yards away from the front steps. "Stop!" she yelled, though her voice was nearly lost in the storm's roar. She half expected him to whirl and fire, but he kept going, shoulders hunched in determination. The fear that he might blast through the front door and find her children stoked Rowan's resolve. She lifted her rifle to her shoulder, blowing rain off the scope. She had one shot at this before Reaper got inside. Time warped in that moment, every raindrop seeming to suspend in midair. Rowan exhaled, aligning the crosshairs on Reaper's upper leg. Enough to stop him, she hoped, without taking his life. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. A muffled cry echoed through the storm as Reaper staggered, collapsing onto the farmhouse's front steps. The handgun in his grip clattered across the porch. Rowan lowered the rifle, relief tangling with lingering dread. She rushed forward, nearly slipping in the mud. Reaper lay sprawled, blood mingling with the rainfall. Despite the wound in his thigh, he still tried to drag himself toward the handgun. Rowan kicked it away, her voice taut with adrenaline. "Don't move!" He glared up at her, face contorted in rage. "This isn't over, Fletcher," he growled, spitting water from his lips. "I've got connections. You can't keep us all in jail forever." Behind her, the yard filled with movement as Harriet, Jonas, and the sheriff converged. Jonas carried a zip tie, which he used to secure Reaper's wrists. Harriet, rifle in hand, scanned for any lingering threats. The orchard defenders hustled across the muddy ground, guiding captured bikers, some wounded, some trembling, toward the sheriff's car. The entire farm resembled a battlefield, lit by sporadic lightning flashes and the rotating red-blue glare of a newly arrived police cruiser. Rowan stared at Reaper for a long moment, her breathing ragged. This was the man who had threatened her children, tried to burn her livelihood, and terrorized an entire town. Yet even now he maintained that lethal aura, as though if he could just get free, he'd try again. She shook off the thought and gestured for Jonas to help haul him upright. She retrieved the sheriff's cuffs from inside the patrol car. Sheriff Douglas was too overwhelmed, dealing with other apprehended bikers, to do it himself. "Let's make it official," she muttered, snapping the cuffs onto Reaper's wrists. In the distance, she heard more sirens wailing, signaling that backup was finally arriving from a neighboring county. Through the sheets of rain, Mia and Theo peeked from the farmhouse doorway, wide-eyed. They'd seen enough to understand the danger was real. Rowan locked eyes with them, giving a tiny nod meant to reassure. They disappeared back inside, presumably to wait for her signal that it was safe. Jonas exhaled, leaning against the porch railing. "We got lucky," he said, voice unsteady from the adrenaline crash. "If they'd come in bigger numbers, or if they'd used heavier firepower..." Rowan nodded, a shiver running through her that had nothing to do with the cold rain. "It wasn't luck, Jonas. It was everyone standing together." She thought of Harriet's unwavering support, the Reverend's moral leadership, even Daniel Cross's willingness to run into danger to help the injured. Augusta Valley had rallied in a way the bikers never expected. She looked down at Reaper, who was grimacing in pain. Something deep in her chest twisted, not pity exactly, but a recognition of how one life's path could twist toward destruction. "You underestimated us," Rowan said quietly, more to herself than to him. "Small towns might look weak, but when we fight for each other, we're not so easy to break." By the time dawn cast its first gray light over Augusta Valley, local law enforcement and a few state troopers had arrived in force. The front yard of Rowan's farmhouse turned into a surreal tableau of flashing lights, muddy footprints, and subdued bikers being carted off in handcuffs. Harriet's orchard was littered with spent shell casings and the scattered debris of a midnight firefight. The adrenaline that had kept everyone awake and alert all night now gave way to an aching exhaustion. Rowan sat on the edge of her porch, an emergency blanket draped around her shoulders, staring out at the troopers who were methodically logging evidence. Sheriff Hugh Douglas approached, limping slightly from a bruised knee. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, though he was already lowering himself onto the porch step. She nodded, managing a faint smile. "I'm just relieved this ended without anyone in town losing their life." The sheriff massaged his temples. "That shot you took, disabling Brick, then the one that saved me from Reaper's gun? I still can't believe it. Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" Rowan hesitated, eyes downcast. The question she'd been dreading. She could sense Harriet, Jonas, and others glancing in her direction, waiting to see how much truth she'd reveal. "I served," she finally said. "Special Forces, sniper." The sheriff nodded slowly, absorbing the revelation. "Well, guess we ought to thank the Army for training you, because you saved more lives than just mine." A new voice chimed in. "Better than my training, that's for sure," said Jonas, trudging up the porch steps. He paused, holding out a thermos. "Coffee. Figured you could use some." She took it, grateful. The warmth spread through her hands, chasing away some of the chill that still clung to her bones. Watching the deputies load Reaper, bandaged leg and all, into a police vehicle, Rowan finally allowed herself to breathe normally. It felt like the first full breath in weeks. In the distance, paramedic Daniel Cross and veterinarian Leslie Astor worked in tandem, tending to both the wounded bikers and the battered defenders. As Harriet came up the porch, Rowan glanced at her questioningly. "Any of them seriously hurt?" Harriet shook her head. "A few broken bones, burns, and a bullet graze here or there, but the medics say they'll all survive. Some will need hospital time before they face charges." Rowan took a sip of coffee, the bitter taste grounding her. "Good. No funerals today." Despite the relief, her shoulders remained tense. A single night of violence might have ended, but the question lingered. Would the Black Ravens or their allies try again? Reading her thoughts, Harriet placed a gentle hand on Rowan's shoulder. "We'll stay vigilant. We have the sheriff's backing, and after last night, no one in town is going to doubt the seriousness of this." She let her gaze drift to the orchard, where a trooper snapped photos of bullet holes in fruit crates. "We'll also have to be ready for any reprisals." Reaper claimed he had connections. He might not have been bluffing. Rowan nodded, a new wave of protectiveness surging through her. She thought of Mia and Theo, finally asleep upstairs, safe for now. She thought of the farmland she loved, bruised but still standing. As sunlight began to filter through the broken clouds, she found herself making a silent vow. Never again would she underestimate the importance of community standing side by side, and never again would she hide the skills that could protect her home. In the days that followed, Augusta Valley underwent a transformation. The charred remains of the old Larson barn served as a haunting reminder of what the community had nearly lost. Yet a sense of solidarity now flowed through the townspeople. Farms shared resources to rebuild damaged fences, neighbors checked in on each other more frequently, and the phone tree Harriet had started evolved into a full-fledged neighborhood watch. Under the sheriff's coordination, local volunteers patrolled the main roads at night, rotating shifts to ensure that any suspicious vehicles would be spotted well before they reached a vulnerable target. Reverend Lionel Grant organized a series of community potlucks and gatherings, providing a space where people could talk openly about their fears and experiences. At one of these gatherings, Rowan found herself pulled aside by Mia and Theo, who wore anxious expressions. "Mom," Mia began, her voice quiet but steady, "people in town keep thanking you for saving them. They say you had, like, special training. Is that true?" Rowan kneeled to meet their eye level, feeling the weight of this conversation. She'd hoped to keep the depth of her past hidden from them, but after the events of the siege, it was impossible to maintain the old illusions. I was a sniper in the military," she admitted, watching how the words landed on her children. "I tried to leave that behind when I moved here, but I guess some skills never really leave you." Theo looked both impressed and frightened. "You shot that man's gun out of his hand, right?" "I saw from the window. That was you." Rowan nodded slowly, heart twinging at the realization that her son had witnessed more violence than any child should. "I'm sorry you had to see that, buddy, but I did what I had to keep us safe." Mia's hand found Rowan's, giving it a gentle squeeze. "Will there be more bad guys?" The question hung in the air. Rowan recalled Harriet's warning that Reaper might have backers beyond the local chapter, or that other criminal elements might see Augusta as a challenge. She swallowed the lump in her throat. "We don't know, but we'll be ready if they come. And until then, life goes on. Tending the crops, taking care of the animals, going to school. All we can do is live our lives and protect each other." Mia and Theo exchanged glances as though silently conferring. Then Mia nodded. "We trust you, Mom." They both hugged Rowan, the kind of fierce, unspoken assurance that brought tears to her eyes. Later, Harriet, Jonas, and Rowan convened at Hastings Feed and Supply once more. This time, instead of hushed secrecy, they spoke openly in front of several neighbors who had come to see them as leaders in defense. A plan emerged to formalize training sessions, non-lethal techniques, basic firearm safety, and methods for disarming aggressors without resorting to lethal force. Rowan felt a pang each time she picked up a rifle in demonstration. Training civilians for potential violence was the last thing she'd ever wanted to do. But if it empowered the community, she would do it wholeheartedly. Outside, the late summer sun baked the dusty roads, a stark contrast to the storm-soaked battle that had taken place just a short time ago. Life pressed forward as it always did, but with a newfound resilience in Augusta Valley. One quiet afternoon, Leslie Astor and Daniel Cross arrived to check on the livestock at Rowan's farm. Officially, Leslie was there to treat a mild infection in Rosalie's hoof, but Rowan suspected both she and Daniel were also evaluating how everyone was coping after the showdown. The paramedic, in particular, had stepped into a firefight he was never trained for, and Rowan had been impressed by his courage under pressure. After the horses were tended, they all gathered at the edge of the field, leaning against the fence rails and looking out over the swaying barley. Jonas drove up in his now infamous pickup, the one he'd fortified for nighttime patrols. He joined them, arms crossed, expression pensive. Heard from Harriet that Reaper and some of his men are being transferred to a higher security facility, he said. Federal charges might be on the table, given the arson attempts and assault on a law officer. Rowan nodded. That's good news. The more serious the charges, the less likely they'll get out soon. Leslie glanced between them, adjusting her baseball cap. But what about the rest of the Black Ravens? We've had a few sightings of stragglers in the next county over. Some folks are worried they might regroup. Daniel set down his medical bag, wiping sweat from his brow. And then there's the question of whether Reaper was the top of the chain or if there's someone else financing their operations. Harriet's documents hinted at a larger criminal network. A heavy silence followed. Rowan recalled Harriet mentioning a file referencing illegal arms deals and bigger syndicates that used rural motorcycle clubs as enforcers. It was a grim possibility. We keep our guard up, Rowan finally said. We've come this far. We can't pretend everything's fixed just because Reaper's behind bars. The conversation shifted to what they could do long-term. Jonas talked about forging a regional alliance of small towns, sharing knowledge, resources, maybe even a mutual defense pact. Leslie and Daniel proposed a combined emergency response network, merging medical training with Harriet's watch system so help could arrive faster if trouble flared again. Rowan gazed out at the farmland, the tall barley dancing under a gentle wind that felt like nature's apology for the recent storms. She thought about how she'd once yearned to bury her old life. Now that life had become the very reason she was able to protect what she loved. If we do this, she said slowly, we're committing to more than just self-defense. We're showing other rural communities that they don't have to give in to fear or intimidation. Jonas nodded, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. Precisely. This is bigger than Augusta now. Folks will hear that we stood up to a dangerous gang and came out on top because we stood together. Leslie leaned on the fence rail, eyes bright with cautious optimism. That kind of hope can spread, especially if we're willing to share everything we learned. The mistakes, the near misses, the successful tactics. In the golden light of late afternoon, their conversation took on a sense of purpose. Rowan felt a swell of gratitude for the people around her, each bringing unique skills, each motivated not by personal gain, but by a determination to keep their loved ones safe. If that meant teaching a new generation of farmers how to handle rifles responsibly, or training paramedics for emergency triage in threatened zones, so be it. The farm, once a sanctuary she cherished in solitude, was now a bastion of collective strength. Days turned into weeks without any major retaliation, allowing Augusta Valley to settle into a new rhythm. Rowan and Mia harvested barley earlier than usual, hoping to mitigate financial losses caused by the chaos of the past season. Local businesses slowly returned to normal as the shadow of the Black Ravens lifted. Newspapers ran stories about how the community had banded together, praising the sheriff's bravery and the townsfolk's resolve. During this relative lull, Harriet took the initiative to compile every piece of intelligence, witness account, and photographic evidence they'd gathered. I'm sending this to a friend in the state capitol, she told Rowan, flipping through a thick binder of documents. Maybe the Attorney General's office will launch a deeper investigation into the bigger network. If they do, we'd have a chance to cut off the roots of this criminal enterprise, not just the local branch. Rowan helped slip the documents into a secure envelope, recalling how Harriet had so casually revealed a past that hinted at government intelligence or something akin. Despite Harriet's advanced age, she moved with the poise of someone who had once operated in high-stakes environments And now she was applying those skills to defend Augusta. "Let me know what your contacts say," Rowan murmured. "If they need more witness statements, you know we're ready." Meanwhile, Jonas took it upon himself to teach a series of weekend workshops. He used the vacant lot behind the diner as a makeshift training ground, demonstrating basic weapon handling, emergency vehicle fortifications, and some first aid procedures that Daniel Cross had taught him. It was surreal to see elderly farmers and teenage ranch hands practicing bandaging techniques under a banner reading "Community Preparedness." But the high turnout spoke volumes about how seriously people now took safety. Rowan attended one workshop and found herself standing beside Reverend Lionel, who was quietly watching the eager participants. The Reverend caught her eye and nodded approvingly. "I worried at first that teaching firearms and combat tactics might erode our sense of community, make us more paranoid. But seeing people help each other like this, it's oddly unifying, isn't it?" She had to agree. People who once barely spoke were now sharing tips on building barricades or spotting suspicious behavior. The line between fear and preparedness had always been thin, but the Reverend was right. This had brought them closer. By evening, the last stragglers left the training site, heading home to dinner tables still laden with fresh produce from late summer gardens. Rowan walked the short distance back to her farm, Mia and Theo sprinting ahead, their laughter echoing in the twilight. It was almost possible to believe they'd returned to normal life, but Rowan knew better. She kept an eye on the horizon, scanning for unfamiliar vehicles, vigilant even in the calm. In her barn loft that night, she found herself reassembling her rifle after routine maintenance. Each part, from the barrel to the bolt, was a physical reminder of the dual life she'd embraced. Farmer and sniper, mother and protector, teacher and enforcer of boundaries no one dared cross. As she tested the rifle's balance, she heard an owl hooting from the rafters. In a strange way, she felt at peace, as though the farmland itself acknowledged her new role. A crisp autumn morning found the town gathered at the refurbished Larson property, where neighbors helped raise a new barn in place of the one the bikers had burned. Timber, ropes, and sweat combined in an old-fashioned barn raising that felt like a celebration of resilience. Mia and Theo ran around with other children, collecting small nails and offering water cups to the workers. The sight warmed Rowan's heart. This was what they'd fought for, a place where kids could be kids, unafraid. As the final beams were hoisted into place, Sheriff Douglas arrived with important news. "I spoke to the district attorney," he announced to the group, taking a break in the shade of a large oak tree. "Reaper and his men are facing multiple felony charges: attempted murder, arson, assault with a deadly weapon. They won't see the light of day for a long time." A hearty cheer went up, tools clanking against crates and the hush of relief sweeping through the crowd. Jonas clapped Rowan on the shoulder. "That's that, then. One less danger for the valley." Harriet, sipping lemonade from a paper cup, wore a more measured expression. "It's a victory, no doubt. But the bigger question remains. Will that higher network come sniffing around? My contact in the capital says the wheels of bureaucracy turn slowly. We should still be on our guard." Rowan nodded. "We'll stay prepared. At least the immediate threat is gone. That alone is worth celebrating." Mia tugged at Rowan's sleeve, eyes bright. "They need more nails up front, Mom. Can I go help?" A soft laugh escaped Rowan's lips. "Of course. Be careful around the hammers, though. Remember what happened last time you tried to help with roofing?" Mia blushed, recalling a bruised thumb, but she dashed off enthusiastically. Rowan watched her daughter go, feeling a wave of gratitude so strong it nearly brought tears. Just a short while ago, she had stared down the possibility of losing everything. Now she was forging a life that encompassed both peaceful farming and steadfast protection. Toward midday, as the barn skeleton stood tall against the autumn sky, people broke for a potluck lunch. Long tables were set with homemade pies, casseroles, and fresh bread. Reverend Lionel offered a brief prayer of thanks, emphasizing unity and community support. The atmosphere brimmed with hope, laughter, and the aroma of home-cooked food. Rowan found a quiet spot near a hay bale, joined by Harriet. They watched the swirl of neighbors bonding over plates of potato salad and apple crisp. "You know," Harriet said softly, "sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if I'd stayed away from intelligence work. If I'd just settled in a small town earlier." Rowan glanced sidelong at her. "You regret it?" A trace of a smile crossed Harriet's lips. No regrets. Experience made me who I am. But seeing this, people coming together to raise a barn, to defend each other, I realize we have more power in unity than I ever saw in all those covert operations. Rowan took in the scene. Jonas animatedly sharing stories of improvised tank repairs from his tours abroad, Mia and Theo giggling with other kids, the sheriff leaning against a tree, relieved for a moment's rest. A light breeze ruffled the newly placed beams of the barn, as though nature itself approved. In that moment, Rowan understood that her journey, farmer, sniper, single mother, had led her here for a reason. She had found a community worth protecting, and in turn, that community had shown her the healing power of belonging. The threat might never be fully gone, but they would face whatever came next, the same way they had faced the Black Ravens, together. In the aftermath, the courage Rowan and her neighbors showed transformed Augusta Valley forever. No longer just peaceful farmers, they became a community bonded by bravery, friendship, and the strength to stand together against impossible odds. Rowan realized that true power comes not from hiding one's past, but embracing it to protect those you love. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you think about Rowan's choice to reveal her past and use her special forces training to defend her town? Would you have done the same? Leave your comments below and let's discuss. Your opinions matter and help our community grow even stronger.